The storm outside had been raging for hours, but nothing compared to the storm inside that office. The walls were lined with glass, polished to perfection, as though the room itself was trying to mirror the man who sat behind the mahogany desk, the CEO of Hardman Enterprises, Daniel Hardman. To the outside world, he was untouchable, ruthless in business, feared in boardrooms, and admired by investors. Yet, behind the closed doors, under the weight of silence and shadows, his power had turned fragile. "Please, don't hit me," Daniel whispered. His voice cracked, the kind of crack that carried years of pain hidden behind expensive suits and flawless smiles. He wasn't speaking to a rival, not to a competitor, but to a man who had entered his world in the most unexpected way, a single dad named James Carter. James hadn't come here to intimidate anyone. In fact, confrontation was the last thing he wanted. He was a mechanic by trade, his hands hardened by grease and years of fixing cars just to make ends meet. He had no interest in corporate wars. His only priority was his daughter, Lily, a bright, curious 9-year-old who often asked questions like, "Daddy, why don't you have an office job?" Or, "Why can't we go on vacations like the other kids?" James would always smile at her, hiding the truth. They didn't have much, but they had love. He promised himself he would protect her from the world's cruelty, even if that meant sacrificing his own dreams. So how did a single father from a run-down neighborhood end up standing in front of one of the most powerful CEOs in the city, while the man begged him not to raise a hand? It started with a simple accident. James had taken Lily to a small bakery one morning, the kind where the smell of cinnamon rolls lingered in the air. She tugged on his sleeve, pointing at the man sitting alone by the window, immaculately dressed, yet hunched over like the weight of the world sat on his shoulders. It was Daniel Hardman. James recognized him instantly. Everyone knew his face from business magazines and billboards. But to Lily, he wasn't a CEO. He was just a lonely man eating a croissant. Without hesitation, she walked up and said, "Hi, I'm Lily. Do you want to sit with us?" James froze, embarrassed, but Daniel looked up, startled. And then, for the first time in what felt like years, he smiled. A real smile. That was the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. Over the next few weeks, Daniel kept showing up at the bakery, at first by coincidence, then by intention. He began to sit with James and Lily, listening to their conversations about school, fixing cars, and even silly jokes. For the CEO who lived in skyscrapers and luxury cars, it was grounding. But Daniel carried secrets. He had grown up in an abusive household, where nothing he did was ever enough. His father, a business tycoon before him, believed fear was the greatest motivator. And so Daniel grew into the man everyone feared, repeating the cycle he despised. He barked orders at his employees, fired people without remorse, and drove himself into loneliness. Until Lily's innocent kindness cracked something open in him. The real turning point came one late evening. James was called to Daniel's office, not as a friend, but as a mechanic. Daniel's luxury car had broken down, and he insisted James fix it personally. When James arrived, he noticed Daniel pacing in his office, his fists clenched. A young assistant, barely out of college, stood trembling before him. Daniel's voice thundered, filled with anger. He slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. James stepped inside just as Daniel raised his hand in frustration. The assistant flinched, and Daniel froze, as though realizing what he was about to become, his father. That's when the words escaped him, softer than a whisper but heavy with desperation. "Please, don't hit me." James stared, confused. The assistant hurried out, and Daniel collapsed into his chair, his mask shattering. In that moment, James saw not the powerful CEO, but a broken man trapped in the shadows of his past. "You're not your father," James said firmly. "You don't have to be." Daniel's eyes filled with tears, foreign, unwelcome, but unstoppable. "I don't know how else to lead. If I'm not feared, I'll lose everything. I've already lost myself." James sat across from him, his voice steady. "You know what my daughter sees in you. Not a CEO. Not a tyrant. Just a man who's lonely. She doesn't care about your empire. She cares about you. And maybe that's what you need to start caring about too. From that night, things began to change, slowly, painfully, but surely. Daniel asked James for help, not with business, but with being human again. James didn't have boardroom advice, but he taught Daniel about patience, about listening, about humility. They fixed cars together in James's small garage. They ate homemade dinners at James's kitchen table, where laughter was louder than stress. Lily, unknowingly, became Daniel's anchor. She would draw him pictures, ask him to read bedtime stories, and invite him to school events. For the first time in decades, Daniel felt what it meant to be part of a family. But change is never without challenges. The board of Hardman Enterprises grew restless. They noticed Daniel's softened approach, fewer firings, more collaboration, even charitable donations. Shareholders accused him of losing his edge. Rivals tried to exploit his new methods as weakness. One evening, Daniel confessed to James, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I can't run this company if I stop being ruthless." James shook his head. "Strength isn't about scaring people into obeying you. It's about inspiring them to follow you. Fear fades, but respect lasts." Those words stuck with Daniel. The greatest challenge, however, came when a scandal threatened to destroy Daniel completely. A rival leaked documents suggesting Hardman Enterprises had exploited workers overseas. Protesters filled the streets, and the media attacked mercilessly. The old Daniel would have silenced the press, fired scapegoats, and hidden behind lawyers. But the new Daniel, the one shaped by a single dad and a little girl, stood on the front steps of his company, facing cameras with honesty. "Yes, mistakes were made," he admitted. "And as CEO, I take full responsibility. But today, that changes. We are implementing fair wages, ethical sourcing, and transparency across every level. Because no success is worth someone else's suffering." The world was stunned. Some mocked him, but many applauded. Slowly, his company rebuilt not just its profits, but its integrity. Through it all, Daniel and James's friendship deepened. Two men from opposite worlds, bound by pain, healing, and an unshakable promise to be better. One night, after Lily had gone to bed, Daniel turned to James and said, "You saved me. I don't know how to repay you." James smiled. "Just be the kind of man Lily already believes you are. That's repayment enough." Years later, Hardman Enterprises became known not for ruthless tactics, but for compassion-driven leadership. Employees felt valued, communities thrived from the company's outreach programs. And at the center of it all was a CEO who no longer ruled with fear, but with respect. But the most important change was not in the company, it was in Daniel himself. He had become part of James and Lily's family, not by blood, but by choice. Holidays were spent together. Dinners were filled with laughter. And whenever Daniel looked at Lily's bright eyes, he was reminded of the day she offered him something no amount of money could buy: kindness. The story of Daniel Hardman and James Carter became a reminder that no one is too powerful to be broken, and no one is too broken to be healed. Because sometimes, it takes the innocence of a child and the strength of an ordinary man to teach even the mightiest that true power lies not in fear, but in love. Final message: we all carry battles no one else sees. Power, wealth, or status can't protect us from pain, but kindness can heal in ways we never expect. Just like James showed Daniel, strength isn't in the hand raised to strike, but in the hand extended to lift someone up.